Chapter 1. From the balcony of her chambers, Lyria Rowan could hear the distant, rhythmic beat of the ceremonial drums, deep, steady, as if they echoed the pulse of the entire pack. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the silver clasp at her throat. The ceremonial gown was pale as moonlight itself, its layered skirts brushing the floor, embroidered with threads that shimmered faintly under the moon's touch. The seamstress had told her the designs represented the bond of a true mate, unbreakable, eternal. But the truth was, her stomach felt like it was tied in knots. This should have been the happiest night of her life. A bonding ceremony wasn't just a romantic union. It was a sacred vow under the eyes of the moon goddess herself. And tonight, she was to stand beside Ronin Vare, the beta of the Ironclaw pack, her fated mate, the man who had sworn to protect her from the moment their eyes met and the bond snapped into place 2 years ago. And yet, somewhere deep in her chest, a whisper of unease stirred. It wasn't about Ronin, or so she told herself. It was about the undercurrent of tension that had been running through the pack for months. Patrols doubling at night, borders reinforced. Strangers seen at the edges of the territory and vanishing before the guards could approach. And the rumors, the rumors, of the Shadowfang Alpha Lord gathering his warriors hungry for territory, hungry for blood. Lyria? The door creaked open and Celine stepped inside. Her half-sister was radiant in a crimson gown that hugged her curves, her dark hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. Celine had always been beautiful in a way that made people turn and look twice, and she knew it. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're not even ready," Celine said, stepping closer and running her fingers over the edge of Lyria's gown as though inspecting it. "You'll have the whole pack waiting." "I am ready," Lyria murmured, turning away to check the moon's position again. Celine's gaze lingered on her a moment too long before she gave a soft laugh. "You really are nervous. You shouldn't be. Ronin's practically worshipped you since the moment you were chosen. Tonight you'll be Luna one day. All you have to do is stand there and smile." Lyria swallowed. She knew Celine meant it as reassurance, but somehow the words felt off. They descended to the courtyard together, the sound of the drums growing louder. Torches lined the stone steps, their flames casting flickering gold over the gathered crowd. The pack stood in a wide circle, faces turned toward the ceremonial dais where Elder Rowan, their father, waited, staff in hand. And there he was, Ronin. He stood at the base of the dais, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair tied back, his beta insignia gleaming against his tunic. His golden-brown eyes found hers immediately, and the bond tugged at her like an invisible thread, familiar, comforting. She forced a smile as she walked toward him. The ceremony began, Elder Rowan's voice deep and commanding as he called upon the moon goddess to bless their union. Lyria's heart pounded as she reached for Ronin's hands. His fingers were warm around hers. The moment felt suspended in time. And then, the scent hit her. Faint but unmistakable. Not hers. It was sweet, intoxicating, but wrong. Another she-wolf's scent clinging to him like a second skin. Her eyes flicked to him sharply, but he didn't look away from the elder. Her pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at her to ignore it, to finish the ceremony and ask later. But her wolf bristled, hackles rising. The elder's voice droned on. She heard nothing. Just the rush of blood in her ears and that foreign scent coiling tighter around her senses. Then came the words, "Step forward and seal the bond with the kiss of fated mates." She stepped toward him, and in that instant she saw it. A smear of crimson lipstick at the corner of his jaw, faint but damning in the torchlight. Her gaze darted past him, searching the crowd. Celine stood there, her lips painted the exact same shade, her smile slow and unrepentant. The bond twisted painfully inside her chest, like claws raking through her heart. She felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Before anyone could speak, she turned and ran. Gasps rose from the crowd, the elder calling her name, Ronin shouting for her to stop, but she didn't. She tore through the gates, skirts ripping against the cobblestones, her bare feet hitting the cold dirt road, and then the forest swallowed her whole. Chapter 2. The cold night air burned in Lyria's lungs as she sprinted past the last of the torchlight, her skirts snagging on thorns, ripping away layers of silk and moon thread embroidery with every desperate step. The sound of her own heartbeat roared in her ears, drowning out the shouts behind her. "Lyria!" Ronin's voice, deep, commanding and edged with something almost panicked, chased her into the dark, but she didn't stop. Her bare feet pounded over damp leaves and twisted roots, and her wolf inside her snarled, not at the cold or the danger, but at the betrayal. That scent, Celine's scent, clinging to him was no accident. It was the scent of skin against skin. The scent of a mate who'd already given himself to another, and the bond burned for it. It wasn't just emotional pain, it was physical, a white-hot tearing in her chest, her wolf howling in rage and grief. The forest around her thickened. The familiar trails she knew from childhood hunts fell away, replaced by a tangle of ancient trees whose branches knitted together overhead, choking the moonlight into slivers. Shadows shifted at the edges of her vision, and the air grew heavier, colder, until even the night creatures fell silent. She'd crossed the border. The forbidden woods. Every pup in the Ironclaw pack grew up on stories of these woods, of rogues with glowing eyes and fangs dripping blood, of creatures half-wolf, half-nightmare, that prowled the undergrowth, of the Shadowfang Pack whose alpha lord was said to be more beast than man, his cruelty whispered in the same breath as curses. Lyria slowed, her breath fogging the air. The drums of the ceremony were gone now, replaced by the eerie stillness of a place where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Snap. Her head whipped around. The sound had come from behind her, too precise to be an animal wandering by chance. The hairs at the nape of her neck stood on end. Another snap, closer this time. Her wolf's instinct screamed. She broke into a run again. Only this time she wasn't running from Ronin. Something followed. The silence fractured into the thud of heavy paws hitting the ground, a pace easily matching hers. She darted between trees, lungs burning, until her foot caught on a root slick with moss and she crashed to the ground. Pain shot up her shin. She scrambled up, but a shadow fell over her. Golden eyes, inhuman and unblinking, stared at her from the darkness. She froze. The figure stepped forward, and the torchlight she'd left far behind could never have touched him, yet his features came into sharp, dangerous clarity. A man, if one could call him that. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair blacker than the night around them, and a jaw cut from stone. His skin held the faint shimmer of moonlight, though no light touched him, and his presence, it pressed against her like a physical force, thick with dominance. Her wolf, wild with fury only moments ago, went utterly still inside her, caught between the instinct to bow and the instinct to bare her teeth. The man's eyes traveled over her, slow and assessing. "You crossed into my woods," he said, his voice deep enough to vibrate in her bones. "And into my territory." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand straighter despite the throbbing in her leg. "I didn't mean—" He stepped closer, too close. She caught his scent then, not the clean pine-sharp scent of an ordinary wolf, but something darker. Smoky, spiced, threaded with the faint metallic tang of blood. No one enters Shadowfang land by accident. Shadowfang. The word made her breath catch. That meant... This was him, Kaelin Duskbane, the Alpha Lord himself. Her heart pounded faster, but not entirely from fear. Something about him, the power in the way he held himself, the unreadable stillness in his gaze, pulled at her in a way she didn't understand, and didn't want to understand. "I'll leave," she said, stepping back. "I didn't come here to cause trouble." He tilted his head, studying her like one might study a puzzle. "You smell of heartbreak," he murmured, almost to himself. "And betrayal." Her chest tightened. "That's none of your concern." A faint smirk touched his lips, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Everything that crosses into my territory is my concern, little wolf." Before she could respond, his hand shot out, fast as lightning, and caught her wrist. The heat of his grip seared through the cold, his strength undeniable. She tried to pull back, but his hold didn't budge. "You're trembling," he observed, his voice dropping to something softer, though no less dangerous. "Is it because you're afraid, or because you know what happens to those I decide to keep?" Her stomach flipped. "You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted, stepping closer until the space between them was a breath. "And I will—" The distant sound of Ironclaw wolves calling her name echoed faintly through the trees. Kaelin's gaze slid in that direction, then returned to hers. Something unreadable passed through those golden eyes. "You're mine now," he said, his tone final as a death sentence. And then, before she could draw another breath, he lifted her into his arms with inhuman ease and carried her deeper into the shadows. Chapter 3. Lyria had never been carried by anyone in her life. Not as a pup, not after her first sparring match injury, not even during the winter blizzard 2 years ago when she'd slipped on ice and bruised her ribs. She was the one who helped others, a healer's apprentice, strong and sure-footed. But now she was weightless in the arms of a man whose strength felt inhuman. His steps so steady and silent that even the leaves underfoot didn't dare crunch. The forest seemed to yield for him. The trees, twisted and ancient, parted just enough to let him pass, then closed again behind him like they were sealing her fate. The air changed as they went deeper. Cold, damp moss gave way to the faint scent of stone and iron. The faintest glow began to bloom ahead, not warm torchlight, but a ghostly blue luminescence seeping from veins of crystal embedded in jagged rock. The path widened into what could only be described as a canyon, a narrow corridor carved into the earth itself. Kaylin's voice broke the silence for the first time since claiming her. "You're lighter than I expected." Lyria stiffened. "Put me down." He glanced down at her, one eyebrow raised. "So you can run?" "No." Her jaw clenched. "I wouldn't." "You would," he said flatly, not even looking at her as his gaze swept ahead, always scanning, always aware. "And you wouldn't make it 100 paces. Not here. What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering, he shifted her slightly in his arms, as if testing her weight again, then continued walking. The silence stretched between them, thick with the awareness of how close they were, how his scent kept flooding her senses until she felt almost dizzy. The path ended at a towering stone archway carved into the mountainside. 2 massive wolves stood guard, not men in wolf form but wolves the size of horses, their fur pitch black, eyes glowing faint amber. Their gaze locked on her instantly. Lyria's breath caught. She'd seen large wolves before. Ironclaw alphas were known for their size, but these were something else entirely. Kaylin didn't slow. The wolves stepped aside, their gaze never leaving her, and the archway swallowed them into darkness. Inside was another world. A vast hall stretched before her, its walls cut from black stone veined with that same eerie blue crystal, casting the space in an otherworldly glow. Fires burned low in iron braziers, their light fighting with the crystal's cold shimmer. Furs covered the floor in irregular patches, trophies of beasts she couldn't even name. The air was warmer here, but heavy, not with smoke or heat, but with power. It rolled over her in waves, an unseen force that prickled her skin and made her wolf curl back in her mind. Dozens of Shadowfang wolves stood along the edges of the hall. Some in human form, some shifted halfway, their eyes luminous in the dim light. They wore dark leathers and armor that looked made for war, every blade at their belts clean and sharpened. None spoke, none even blinked. Their focus was on Kaylin, and on her. At the far end, elevated by a few broad steps, stood the throne. It wasn't ornate. It wasn't even beautiful in the traditional sense. It was carved from a single slab of black stone, its back rising high and sharp like a fang piercing upward toward the ceiling. Pelts draped across its seat, white wolf fur, silver fox, black bear, and behind it the wall bore an ancient sigil burned deep into the rock, a wolf's head surrounded by a crescent moon, fangs bared. Kaylin set her down in the center of the hall, his hands lingering just a heartbeat too long at her waist before stepping back. "Elder Thorn!" Kaylin called, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. An older man emerged from the shadows, tall but wiry, with silver hair pulled back and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He moved like someone who had once been dangerous, and still could be, if given reason. "She crossed the border," Kaylin said simply, his gaze never leaving her. "And now she is mine." A ripple went through the gathered wolves, a shift in weight, a faint murmur, but no one openly challenged the statement. Elder Thorn's eyes swept over her, lingering as though he was reading something in her face, her stance, maybe even her scent. "Ironclaw," he said at last, "but not ordinary." Lyria's heart skipped. "I'm not yours," she said sharply, forcing her voice not to shake. Kaylin's mouth curved, but there was nothing warm in it. "We'll see." Thorn's gaze moved between them, something calculating flickering in his expression. "What do you want done with her?" Kaylin took a slow step toward her, his presence wrapping around her like a shadow, heavy and inevitable. Prepare a chamber. She stays here, under guard. And make sure the healers see to that leg. I don't need— You do, he cut in, his voice quiet but final. I want you able to walk when I decide it's time. Her pulse kicked up. When you decide what's time for what? His golden eyes held hers for a long, unreadable moment. Then he said, low enough that only she could hear, to decide whether I'll let you go, or keep you forever. Chapter 4. The chamber they placed her in was not the prison she expected. It was high in one of the fortress towers, with arched windows that looked out over the jagged peaks and the endless sweep of pine forest below. The bed was vast, layered in pelts so soft her fingers sank into them. A low fire burned in the hearth, filling the air with the faint, smoky scent of cedarwood. But the guards outside the heavy iron-banded door told her exactly what it was: a gilded cage. Lyria stood by the window, hands braced on the cold stone sill, staring out at the silver thread of a river far below. The sky was beginning to pale, dawn creeping in on a night that felt as if it had stretched for days. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the memory of Ronin's scent tangled with Celine's came rushing back, followed by the moment Kaelin's golden gaze had locked on hers in the forest, as if he could see every secret she'd ever tried to hide. The door opened without a knock. Kaelin stepped inside, as if the space already belonged to him. His presence filled the room in a way that made the air feel thicker, harder to breathe. He wasn't dressed in armor now, but in a black tunic and leather trousers that moved with the grace of someone who could fight just as easily unarmed as with a blade. He took in the sight of her, still in the tattered remnants of her ceremonial gown, hair loose and tangled from the wind, and one corner of his mouth lifted, not in amusement, but in some private assessment. You'll need different clothes, he said. Shadowfang silk. It moves with you, doesn't tangle when you shift. I'm not staying, she replied before she could stop herself. He ignored the words as if they were wind. Come. She didn't move. Where? To the Great Hall. My pack will want to see you. I'm not your— Yes, you are, he cut in, his voice a low growl that brushed against her skin like the stroke of a claw. And they will know it before the sun is fully risen. The Great Hall was even more imposing in daylight. The cold blue light of the crystal veins was now joined by the sun's pale rays, filtering through narrow slits high in the stone walls. The wolves of Shadowfang Pack gathered in a wide circle around the throne dais, their eyes bright and watchful. Some shifted as she passed, not fully into wolf form but just enough for claws to scrape against the stone or for fangs to glint in the light. It was a silent display. You are prey, here in our den. Kaelin walked beside her, his long strides unhurried, his hand resting lightly, but unmistakably, at the small of her back. The touch wasn't intimate in the human sense. It was a statement, a claim. They mounted the steps to the throne. Kaelin turned to face his pack, and the low hum of voices fell away into complete silence. This female crossed our borders, he began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. She is Ironclaw, and yet she came to Shadowfang land without fear. A ripple went through the crowd, not of admiration, but of disbelief. No one came here willingly. She is mine now, Kaelin continued, his gaze sweeping over the gathered wolves. And I will hear no challenge to this. A murmur rose, sharper this time. One wolf stepped forward, a broad-shouldered male with scars down one cheek. Alpha, he said, his tone respectful but edged. She is an outsider. An Ironclaw. You can't expect the pack to— The sound Kaelin made wasn't loud, but it silenced the wolf instantly, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in Lyria's bones. His eyes glinted, dangerous and bright. I do not ask the pack to approve, he said softly, which somehow made the words more menacing. I tell the pack what is. His attention shifted to Lyria. Step forward. She hesitated, and the silence pressed in like a physical weight. Dozens of eyes were on her, some curious, most hostile. She could feel the heat of Kaelin's gaze on her even without looking at him. Reluctantly, she stepped to his side. Kaelin drew a blade from his belt, not the long curved sword he'd worn in the forest, but a smaller dagger with a hilt carved from obsidian. He turned the blade in his hand until the edge caught the blue light. Do you know what this is? He asked. She shook her head. It is used for the blood oath, he said. A vow older than the moon goddess's first blessing. When I mark you with it, It tells every wolf who scents you that you are under my protection. It also tells them that to touch you without my leave is to invite my wrath." Her breath caught. "You can't just—" He closed the small distance between them, the blade now glinting between them. "You can leave, if you can get past me and past them." His gaze flicked toward the watching wolves. "Or you can take the oath and walk here in safety." It was no real choice. Her heart pounded as she extended her hand. His fingers closed over hers, warm, strong, and unyielding. He brought the dagger down, just enough to nick the pad of her thumb. A bead of blood welled up, bright and hot. Kaelin caught her hand in his and lifted it to his mouth. His lips brushed her skin, and for a heartbeat she felt the heat of his breath, the scrape of a fang, and something else. A pull, deep in her chest, as if some invisible thread had tightened between them. When he pulled back, the watching wolves lowered their heads in unspoken acknowledgement. "It is done," Kaelin said, releasing her hand at last. "You are Shadowfang now." The words landed like a stone in her stomach. Shadowfang, not Ironclaw, and not free. Chapter 5. The days after the blood oath bled together in a haze of unfamiliar scents, strange corridors, and eyes that followed her every step. Lyria had been given her own chamber, if it could be called hers. The walls were hung with deep crimson banners bearing the Shadowfang sigil. The bed was draped in furs dyed black, and the single narrow window overlooked a sheer drop into the forested valley below. There was no lock on the inside of the heavy oak door. No need for one. The guards outside never left their post. Her ceremonial gown had been taken, replaced with clothes of Shadowfang silk, a material so light and fluid it whispered against her skin with each movement. The tunics and leggings were made for both human and wolf form, the seams stretching without tearing. They were practical, and yet, the way they clung to her made her feel uncomfortably aware of herself. Kaelin had not come to see her for 2 days. Not that she was counting, not that she noticed every time the sound of boots in the hall slowed outside her door, only to continue past. Instead, it was Elder Thorn who visited. He brought her meals. Hearty stews spiced with herbs she didn't recognize, thick slices of smoked meat, and bread still warm from the hearth. He would sit, speaking little, his sharp eyes studying her as though trying to solve a riddle. "You have the look of someone searching for a way out," Thorn said on the 3rd day, as he set down a tray. She didn't deny it. "I don't belong here." His expression didn't change. "You do now. The Alpha has claimed you. The blood oath is not a thing easily broken." "I didn't agree to it," she snapped. "Neither do the conquered," Thorn replied calmly. "And yet the law still binds them." The words chilled her more than the stone walls. That night, she could not sleep. The moon was a thin crescent beyond her window, and the fortress seemed to hum faintly in the dark. A low vibration in the stone, as though the mountain itself held a heartbeat. She rose, pulling a fur-lined cloak over her shoulders, and pressed her palm to the window's cold frame. Far below, torches flickered along the outer wall. The watch changed every few hours, each pair of guards moving with silent precision. Shadowfang discipline was nothing like Ironclaw's. This was a pack always on edge, always expecting attack. She thought of Ronin, and the ache in her chest twisted sharper. She tried to push the image away, but Celine's smirk that night, the lipstick on his jaw, flashed like a blade in her mind. She turned away from the window and froze. Kaelin stood in the doorway, no knock, no sound, just there, as if the shadows had let him go only when they wanted her to see him. He was dressed in black again, but this time without the armor, just a fitted tunic that did nothing to hide the way muscle shifted beneath the fabric. His hair was loose, falling in an inky spill past his shoulders, and his golden eyes caught what little moonlight entered the room. "You're awake," he said, voice quiet but edged with certainty, as though he'd known she would be. She straightened, the cloak pulling tighter around her. "You shouldn't be in here." He stepped inside anyway, closing the door behind him with deliberate slowness. "This is my fortress. Every room is mine to enter." Her pulse jumped, but she forced her chin up. "Why are you here?" Kaelin's gaze slid over her, assessing, lingering on the way she clutched the cloak. "You've been here 3 days, and yet you haven't asked me why I kept you," she swallowed. "I didn't need to. You want leverage over Ironclaw, that's all this is." His mouth curved in something that might have been a smile, though it held no amusement. Leverage. And perhaps something more. The air between them thickened. She took a step back, but her heel met the edge of the bed, and she realized too late she had nowhere to retreat. Kalen stopped just close enough for her to feel the heat radiating off him. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to flinch if she wanted to, and brushed his fingers over the edge of her cloak, pushing it back from her shoulder. "You smell of Ironclaw still," he murmured. "It will fade, but not quickly. Until it does, some here will want to test you." His gaze lifted to meet hers, sharp and unwavering. "If they do, they will learn quickly that you are under my protection. But protection has a cost." Her voice came out tighter than she intended. "And what is that cost?" His hand lingered at her shoulder, warm and firm. "Obedience." The word thrummed in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She held his gaze, refusing to look away, though her heart hammered so hard it felt like it might shake her ribs apart. "I'm not a prisoner." "You're not," Kalen agreed, his voice dropping lower. "You're mine." The way he said it, not as a threat but as a truth carved into stone, sent a shiver down her spine. He stepped back at last, breaking the tension as easily as if he'd cut a rope. "The hunt begins at dawn. You'll ride with me. I'm not—" "You are," he interrupted. "If you're to live here, you'll learn our ways, and you'll learn quickly." With that, he turned and left, the heavy door closing behind him with a final thud that seemed to echo through her chest. Lyria stood in the silence, cloak still clutched around her, pulse racing. She told herself it was anger, that it was the sheer arrogance of him, of his claim. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to name, she knew it wasn't only that. Chapter 6. The horn sounded at first light. It wasn't a loud, blaring call, more a deep, resonant note that seemed to hum through the stone of the fortress itself. Lyria woke to it, her wolf stirring uneasily in her chest as though it recognized the sound and the purpose behind it. When she rose and crossed to the narrow window, the courtyard below was already alive with movement. Shadowfang warriors were gathering, some in human form, strapping on leather armor and sharpening weapons. Others already shifted, their wolves pacing with barely contained energy. The air was thick with the scents of pine, cold earth, and the metallic tang of anticipation. A knock sounded at her door, firm but not waiting for permission before it opened. It was not Kalen this time, but a young she-wolf with a braid so tight it gleamed in the early light. She carried folded clothing in her arms. "For the hunt," she said curtly, placing the garments on the bed. Lyria glanced at them. Dark leather riding trousers, a sleeveless tunic, and a thick black cloak trimmed in fur. The silk of the tunic was the same fluid Shadowfang weave as before, soft but deceptively strong, designed for movement. "What kind of hunt is this?" Lyria asked. The girl's gaze flicked over her briefly, then back toward the hall. "The kind you survive," she said, and left without another word. By the time Lyria descended to the courtyard, the pack was assembled. Horses stamped their hooves, breath steaming in the cold morning air. The wolves who had shifted moved restlessly at the edge, eyes gleaming gold and amber in the low sun. Kalen stood near the front, speaking quietly to Elder Thorn. His black stallion, a beast as large and imposing as his master, pawed the ground, eager to move. When Kalen's gaze lifted and found hers, it was like being caught in the pull of a tide. There was no mistaking the faint curve of his mouth as he took in the sight of her in Shadowfang colors. He mounted in one fluid motion, then extended a gloved hand toward her. "You'll ride with me," he said. "I can ride on my own," she countered, scanning the other horses. "You could," he agreed, "but you won't." His hand stayed outstretched. Not an offer, but a command. The murmur of the watching pack made her jaw tighten. She placed her hand in his and let him pull her up, seating her in front of him on the stallion. The heat of his body was immediate, solid against her back, his arm easily circling her waist as he took the reins. The pack rode out at a brisk pace, hooves and paws crunching through frost-covered ground. The forest closed around them quickly, the tall pines casting long shadows that still held the chill of night. After nearly an hour of travel, Kalen slowed the stallion to a halt at a clearing marked by a fallen oak. "This is where we split," he announced to the gathered wolves. "Half will circle east toward the river, the rest with me to the high ridge." Lyria noticed the way the wolves followed his orders without hesitation. No discussion, no argument. Ironclaw Alpha's inspired loyalty, But this was different. This was obedience born of respect and fear. "What are we hunting?" she asked quietly. Kaylin's gaze swept the trees before answering. "Rogues. 3 were spotted near the outer border 2 nights ago. If they're still here, we'll find them." Her stomach tightened. Rogues weren't just loners. They were wolves without a pack bond, their instincts untempered by the Luna's blessing. Some went mad from it. Most turned dangerous. The group fanned out, and Lyria quickly realized this wasn't simply a patrol. It was a test. Every so often, a wolf would fall back to glance at her, measuring her, perhaps wondering what made her worth their alpha's claim. The trail grew steeper as they approached the ridge, frost giving way to patches of ice that cracked under the horses' hooves. The air thinned, sharper in her lungs. Kaylin's arm tightened subtly around her waist when the stallion stumbled, steadying her before she could even think to reach for balance. The scent hit her before she saw anything, sharp, acrid, and wrong. Kaylin's posture shifted instantly, his head lifting slightly as he scented the wind. His voice was low, meant only for her, "Stay close." A rustle in the brush to their right, then another to the left. 3 wolves emerged from the shadows of the pines. Not Shadowfang, not Ironclaw. Their coats were matted, eyes unnaturally bright, teeth bared in feral snarls. One of Kaylin's warriors stepped forward, claws half shifted, but the lead rogue lunged first, and the clearing exploded into motion. Kaylin swung down from the stallion, landing lightly for a man his size, and pushed Lyria back toward the safety of the horse. "Do not move from here," he ordered, the command carrying the weight of his alpha tone. Her wolf shuddered under it, every instinct telling her to obey. But when one of the rogues broke past the warriors and circled toward her, instinct shifted to survival. She grabbed a fallen branch, holding it like a spear. The rogue growled low, eyes locked on her, steps slow and deliberate, playing with prey. And then Kaylin was there. One moment the rogue was advancing, the next, Kaylin had him by the throat, lifting him clear off the ground with one hand. His eyes burned gold, his fangs bared in a snarl that made the hair on Lyria's arms rise. "She is mine," Kaylin growled, not loudly, but with a lethal promise in every syllable. Then, with a twist of his wrist, he sent the rogue crashing into the underbrush, unconscious before he hit the ground. The other rogues were dispatched just as swiftly, the remaining warriors driving them back until the forest fell silent again. When it was over, Kaylin turned back to her. His gaze swept over her quickly, checking for blood, for injury, before settling on her face. "You stood your ground," he said. "Good." Her grip on the branch tightened. "I told you I can take care of myself." His mouth curved in something between approval and warning. "Not from everything, not yet." Before she could respond, he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat rolling off him, close enough that his scent, that dark, smoky, dangerous scent, filled her senses. "Until you can," he said softly, "you stay where I tell you, and you fight beside me when I say so. Do you understand?" Her heartbeat was still hammering from the fight, but she held his gaze. "I understand." Something flickered in his eyes, satisfaction perhaps, before he turned away, swinging back onto the stallion and offering his hand once more. When she took it this time, his fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary, and when they rode back toward the fortress, the air between them was heavy with something unspoken. Chapter 7. The Shadowfang fortress was quieter than usual when they returned from the hunt. Not silent, never truly silent, but the low hum of daily life was subdued, replaced by the faint electric tension that prickled against Lyria's senses the moment they passed through the outer gates. It wasn't just the residual adrenaline from the rogue attack. The pack was watching them, not openly, not enough to be called disrespectful, but eyes tracked Kaylin as he dismounted, heads tilted subtly toward him as though catching some unspoken current in the air. Warriors paused mid-conversation when they saw Lyria still riding in front of their alpha, his arm casually, yet possessively, resting around her waist. Kaylin didn't acknowledge the attention. His control was absolute, his expression unreadable as he lifted her down from the stallion. The moment her feet touched the ground, the warmth of his body was gone, but the imprint of it lingered on her skin, making her acutely aware of how much colder the morning had become. Before she could ask what was wrong, Elder Thorn approached. His gait was brisk, but there was an urgency beneath it that set Lyria's instincts humming. "Alpha," Thorn said in a low tone, inclining his head. "We have a situation at the Northern Watch." Kaelin's gaze sharpened immediately. "Who?" Thorn hesitated, just a fraction, before answering. "An envoy from Ironclaw. He carries no challenge, no war banner, but he is not alone." Kaelin's jaw tensed. "Speak plainly, Thorn. It's Beta Ronin," Thorn said, "and he claims he's come to speak with her." For a heartbeat, Lyria didn't move. The name hit her like an icy arrow to the chest, slicing through the protective fog she'd been building since Kaelin claimed her as his. Ronin. The male who had sworn himself to her, the one who had stood before the Moonstone altar and promised her the bond would be honored. The one who had shattered it without a flicker of remorse when something, or someone, better came along. Her wolf stirred uneasily, a low growl reverberating deep in her chest. "He's not setting foot past the watchtower," Kaelin said, his voice quiet but edged in steel. "Bring him to the Great Hall courtyard, surrounded. I want him to see exactly what it means to stand in Shadowfang territory without my leave." Thorn bowed and moved off at once, his orders already rippling through the pack. Kaelin turned to Lyria then, and his eyes were no longer the dark, controlled storm she'd come to recognize. They were molten, dangerous. "You don't have to see him," he said. It wasn't a question. But the truth was, she did. Not for Ronin's sake and not for closure. That was a story she no longer believed in. She needed to see him for herself, to strip away whatever illusions her mind still tried to cling to about who he had been. "I'll see him," she said, lifting her chin. Kaelin studied her for a long moment. There was approval there, but also something else. Possessiveness, maybe, or the sharp edge of a predator weighing whether to bare his teeth. "Then you'll stand beside me when you do," he said. The Great Hall courtyard was already filling by the time they arrived. The Shadowfang Pack formed a wide ring, warriors in the front, others on the outer edges. The air was charged, not hostile yet, but watchful, like the hush before a storm. Ronin stood in the center with 2 iron-claw wolves at his back. He looked much as she remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, his hair the same sunshot brown that had once caught her attention during training drills. But where she expected warmth, there was a calculating glint in his eyes now. Those eyes flicked over her when she stepped into the courtyard beside Kaelin, not with remorse, not even guilt, just possession, as if he could still claim the right to look at her like that. "Lyria," he said, his voice carefully smooth. "You came where you were not invited," Kaelin cut in, his tone deceptively calm. "You walked my border with warriors at your back, without sending word. You stand here under my moon, speaking my claimed female's name without my leave. Tell me, Beta, is it courage or stupidity?" A flicker of heat burned in Ronin's gaze. "She's not your female, Kaelin. She's Ironclaw. She's mine," Kaelin said, the words sharp enough to slice the air between them. "And you forfeited any right to speak for her the moment you broke the bond you swore to honor." A ripple of approval went through the Shadowfang Pack, low and dangerous. Lyria's pulse thundered, but she held Ronin's gaze. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice steady. Ronin's expression softened. Practiced, she realized, like the gentle tone he'd used on her before the betrayal. "Because I made a mistake. I was wrong to betray too, Lyria. You weren't wrong," she said, and the words surprised her with how true they felt. "You were exactly who you've always been. I just didn't see it until now." His jaw tightened. "You think Kaelin is any better? He's using you to provoke Ironclaw. You're a pawn to him." "Careful," Kaelin said softly. The kind of soft that made warriors step back. "You're in my den, Beta. And the only reason your throat isn't on the stones right now is because she hasn't asked for it." The moment stretched, tension wound so tight it felt like the air might shatter. Finally, Ronin's gaze flicked from Kaelin back to Lyria. "This isn't over." "Oh, it is," she said, her voice low but cutting. "You just don't know it yet." Kaelin stepped forward then, a deliberate, predatory move that sent Ronin's guards shifting uneasily. "Leave, now, and tell your alpha that if Ironclaw wolves cross my border again without leave, I won't just send them back breathing less air. I'll send them back in pieces." Ronin's mouth curved in something between a sneer and a smirk, but he turned without another word. His guards followed, the ring of Shadowfang warriors parting only enough to let them through. When they were gone, Kaelin's hand found the small of Lyria's back, firm, grounding, and unapologetically claiming. "You did well," he said. She didn't answer, because even though Ronin was gone, she could still feel the echo of his presence, and the strange, simmering heat of Kaylin's hand lingering against her spine. Chapter 8. The Shadowfang fortress was unrecognizable that night. Where earlier in the day the courtyard had been heavy with the scent of confrontation and the iron tang of Ronin's unwelcome presence, now it pulsed with life. Torches blazed in every corner, their flames licking gold and crimson against the deep shadows of the stone walls. The autumn wind carried the mingling scents of roasted venison, spiced mead, and wood smoke. Drums thrummed from somewhere near the eastern archway, slow and deep at first, then climbing into an almost primal rhythm that set the air itself vibrating. It was the Moonblood Feast, the Shadowfang Pack's most sacred and dangerous celebration. Sacred, because it honored the blessing of the blood moon, when the veil between wolf and spirit thinned, granting visions to those favored by the moon goddess. Dangerous, because the same wild energy that opened the mind also sharpened desire, hunger, and instincts. Lyria had never seen anything like it. Kaylin had not asked her if she wished to attend. He had told her she would, but his tone had not been command alone. There had been something in his eyes earlier, a shadow of anticipation, as though he knew this night would change something between them. And now, as she stood at the balcony above the great hall, looking down at the sea of moving bodies below, she began to understand why. Shadowfang wolves danced barefoot in the torchlight, the flicker of flames catching on sweat-slick skin and dark leather. Warriors clasped arms in mock combat, their laughter loud and unrestrained. Others tilted their heads back as mead was poured straight from clay jugs into waiting mouths. Everywhere she looked, there was contact, a hand on the back of a neck, fingers tracing down a forearm, the brief clash of bodies in challenge or flirtation. The feast was a night when bonds were tested, broken, or formed anew, and in the center of it all was Kaylin. He wore no crown tonight, no ceremonial armor, just a black tunic laced loosely at the chest, the sleeves pushed to his forearms, revealing the corded strength of his muscles. His dark hair caught the torchlight in shades of bronze and shadow, and his eyes, moonlight silver, dangerous and impossibly focused. On her, she didn't even realize she'd begun moving until she reached the staircase. Kaylin didn't meet her halfway. He simply waited at the base, one hand wrapped around a carved drinking horn, the other resting loosely at his side. But the way his gaze swept over her made her feel as if every other wolf in the hall had melted away. She'd chosen one of the Shadowfang silks left in her chambers, deep wine red, the color of ripe berries and spilled blood. The dress was sleeveless, cut to skim her body, and laced at the sides with black leather cords. The neckline plunged lower than she was used to, but something in her had wanted him to notice. And judging by the way his fingers tightened imperceptibly on the drinking horn, he had... "You're late," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the drums. "I wasn't aware there was a schedule," she replied, lifting her chin just slightly. "There isn't," he said, stepping closer until the scent of him, pine, steel, and something darker, filled her senses. "But I noticed you weren't here. And I don't like noticing you're gone." The words hit low in her belly, sparking a heat she wasn't ready to name. Before she could answer, Kaylin tipped his head toward the center of the hall. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request, but the part of her that might have bristled at that weeks ago didn't. Not tonight. The drums shifted, the tempo deepening, and Kaylin led her into the torchlit space. Wolves parted to make way, their eyes following, not just because he was alpha, but because they wanted to see how she moved with him. At first, she followed his lead awkwardly, trying to anticipate his steps. But Kaylin's grip on her waist was firm, guiding her with the same surety he carried into battle. He didn't look down at their feet. He looked only at her, his expression a blend of focus and something far more dangerous. The rhythm took her before she realized it, the drumbeat syncing with the pulse in her veins. The circle of watching wolves blurred, their voices fading, until there was only Kaylin's heat against her and the primal music between them. When the drums reached their crescendo, he spun her, and for a moment she was weightless, her hair flying, the torchlight a blur, before he caught her against him again. Their bodies aligned, breath mingling. "You're learning," he murmured. "You're leading," she countered, but her voice was softer now. his lips curved, not in amusement but in a slow, knowing acknowledgement. The rest of the night was a haze of sensation. Wolves shifted in the shadows to run under the blood-red moon. A bonfire roared in the courtyard, sparks flying high into the night sky. At some point, Kalen draped his black alpha's cloak over her shoulders when the wind turned sharp, the weight of it heavy and warm, smelling of him. But the moment that burned itself into her memory came later, when the drums quieted and the crowd thinned. Kalen stood beside her at the edge of the courtyard, looking up at the swollen red moon. "Tonight the goddess shows truths to those who dare to look," he said. "And if they don't want to see?" she asked. His gaze found hers, silver bright under the moonlight. "The truth doesn't care." Her heart beat hard, but before she could speak, a howl split the night from beyond the fortress walls. It was long, low, and carried a note that made every wolf in the courtyard go still. Not Shadowfang. Not friendly. Kalen's jaw hardened. "Stay inside," he said, his voice shifting instantly from something intimate to the clipped steel of command. "Whatever's coming, it's not just here for me, it was here for her." Chapter 9. The howl lingered in the night air like a blade left half buried in flesh. Just enough to sting, just enough to warn that the real pain was yet to come. The courtyard had gone utterly still. Every Shadowfang wolf, whether in human form or half-shifted, stood with heads tilted slightly upward, nostrils flaring, ears straining toward the distant tree line. The firelight danced across their tense faces, catching on the glint of sharpened teeth and eyes that burned in shades of amber, gold, and silver. Kalen's entire body shifted in an instant, not a full transformation but a coiling, ready stance that told every muscle in him was already preparing for the shift. His breathing slowed, deliberate, as though scenting the wind. When he spoke, his voice was deep, controlled, but with an edge of fury that rolled through the courtyard like distant thunder. "They're in our territory." A murmur of recognition and outrage rippled through the crowd. "Who?" Lyria asked before she could stop herself, the sound of her own voice almost startling in the tense silence. Kalen's eyes flicked to hers, sharp, silver bright in the torchlight. "Not now." Then his gaze swept the gathered wolves, and his voice rose, ringing with alpha authority. "Form the perimeter. No one passes the tree line without my order. This is Shadowfang ground. We bleed no intruder who escapes to boast about it." Warriors moved instantly, scattering into the night in streaks of leather, steel, and fur. Some shifted mid-stride, their bones snapping and reforming into lupine shapes, their howls answering the intruder's call like the clash of war drum. Kalen turned back to her, the intensity in his gaze now wholly on her. "You're going inside." Lyria's instinct was to protest. Her blood still thrummed with the heat of the feast, her curiosity clawing at her ribs. But something in the way his jaw tightened told her this was no ordinary border breach. "Why?" she demanded. "You said," I said inside. His voice dropped low, the kind of low that was more dangerous than a shout. "You smell different tonight, Lyria. Stronger. Every wolf here can scent it, and so can they." She froze. "What are you talking about?" His gaze flicked down to her throat, then back up. "You've been under my protection for days now. That makes you a prize to some, a challenge to others. The blood moon amplifies it." His hand brushed hers, not gently, but in a deliberate, grounding way. "You're the reason they're here." Her chest tightened. "That's impossible. They know enough." His tone made it clear there would be no further debate. "You're staying in the West Tower until I return. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." She should have listened. She almost did. But the moment Kalen strode away, his dark form merging with the shadowed tree line, the weight of his cloak still heavy on her shoulders, something inside her twisted. She didn't want to sit in a tower and wait to be told the truth. Not anymore. So instead of retreating upstairs, Lyria slipped along the inner wall of the courtyard, keeping to the deepest shadows. From here, she could see the perimeter wolves fanning out, their glowing eyes sweeping the darkness. She caught flashes of silver fur, Kalen's wolf, moving fast and low along the edge of the forest. He was heading toward the source of the howl. She knew it was reckless. She knew Kalen would be furious. But she also knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. She had to see who, or what, was bold enough to breach Shadowfang territory under a blood moon. The forest swallowed her quickly. The torchlight from the fortress faded behind her, replaced by the eerie red glow that filtered through the canopy. The air was sharp with pine and cold earth, but threaded through it was another scent. Sharp, acrid, unfamiliar. It prickled at her instincts even though she was no wolf. Voices murmured somewhere ahead, not the deep, rumbling speech of wolves in human form, but something more clipped, more deliberate. She moved toward them, keeping her steps light on the leaf litter. The first figure she saw was not a Shadowfang wolf at all. He stood in a small clearing, his back half turned to her, the moonlight glinting off a band of dark metal that circled his throat. A hunter's restraint collar. It was a cruel device designed to choke off a shifter's ability to shift at will. His clothing was travel-worn, his boots caked in mud. But his posture, that was no lone wanderer. That was someone who moved with purpose. Another figure stepped into view, taller, leaner, with eyes like pale frost. "The girl's here," he said, his voice low but clear enough that Lyria heard it. "He's protecting her, which means she's important." Lyria's heart pounded. "Then we'll make her ours," the first man replied, his tone chilling in its calm. "The Alpha Lord can't guard his prize forever." Before she could even think of retreating, a howl ripped through the clearing, close, fierce, and furious. Silver fur blurred between the trees, and Kalen was suddenly there, his wolf form a towering lethal force. His teeth bared in a snarl that made the air itself vibrate. The intruders didn't hesitate. They bolted into the forest's deeper shadows. But Kalen didn't chase them immediately. Instead, he turned toward where Lyria crouched behind a fallen log, his silver eyes locking onto hers with such intensity that her breath caught. He stalked toward her, shifting as he moved, bones cracking, fur receding until he stood before her once more in human form, bare-chested and wild-eyed under the blood moon. "I told you to stay inside," he growled. "I heard them," she said, her voice shaking. "They're after me, Kalen." "Why? Who are they?" His chest rose and fell, the fury in his eyes warring with something else, something darker, heavier. "You're going to find out," he said at last, "but not here, not tonight." Then, without waiting for her to argue, he caught her wrist and pulled her back toward the fortress, his grip unyielding. Somewhere behind them another howl rose, closer this time, and Lyria knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chapter 10. The fortress gates slammed shut with the groaning finality of iron biting stone. The sound echoed through the courtyard, sealing the night in red moonlight, and the sharp tang of fear. Kalen didn't release Lyria until they were halfway across the yard, and even then, it was only because two Shadowfang warriors rushed up to him, dragging between them a man in chains. The prisoner's head hung low, hair matted with sweat and blood, but his posture wasn't defeated. No, there was a dangerous looseness to the way he moved, like a snake biding its time. His wrists were shackled with silver manacles, the metal biting into flesh that hissed faintly where skin met enchanted alloy. "Found him on the east perimeter," one of the warriors said, breathless. "He wasn't running with the others. He waited for us." That alone made Kalen's jaw tense. "Put him in the west cell," he ordered, voice like cold steel. "And post 2 guards, warriors, not sentries. No one speaks to him but me." The man chuckled low under his breath, and Lyria's gaze snapped to him. When his head finally lifted, she saw his eyes, pale, almost colorless, yet disturbingly sharp. They flicked to her for only a fraction of a second, but in that instant she felt seen in a way that made her stomach clench. Kalen must have noticed, because in the next breath he stepped between them, his broad frame a deliberate barrier. "Move him," he growled. The warriors dragged the prisoner away, his chains clinking against the cobblestones until the sound faded down the corridor to the dungeons. Kalen turned on her. "Inside. Now." "No," Lyria said before she could stop herself. "I saw the way he looked at me. He knows something." Kalen's eyes flashed silver, his temper barely leashed. "And you think I'm about to let you walk into a cell with him? He's baiting us." "Then let me be bait," she shot back, the words tumbling out faster than reason could catch them. "If he wants to talk, he'll talk to me." "You know it." For a moment, Kalen said nothing, just stared at her. His expression caught between murderous frustration and reluctant calculation. Finally, he exhaled, slow and dangerous. "You stay behind me. You don't speak unless I tell you. If he so much as breathes wrong, I'll tear his throat out before his next heartbeat." It wasn't a victory, not really, but it was enough. The west cell was nothing like the ornate halls above. Down here, the air was damp and metallic, the flicker of torchlight casting long shifting shadows on the stone walls. The cells themselves were reinforced with thick iron bars and layered with protective runes. Kaelin's pack didn't take chances with dangerous prisoners. The man was already inside, sitting on the edge of the narrow bench, wrists still bound in silver. His pale eyes tracked them as they approached. "Alpha Lord," he said smoothly, his voice carrying a faint accent Lyria couldn't place. "And the girl, her name isn't for your mouth," Kaelin growled, stepping into the torchlight. The man's smile widened, revealing teeth too even, too perfect for a life on the run. "Names are everything, Alpha. The right name can open doors, or close them forever." Lyria's pulse quickened. "You know my name?" she asked before Kaelin could stop her. The prisoner tilted his head, studying her with unnerving patience. "I know more than that, little moon. I know why the beta betrayed you. I know why the alpha keeps you close. And I know that when the next moon rises you won't belong to him. Or to yourself." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" The man's smile turned almost pitying. "You don't feel it yet? The pull in your blood? The way the world smells sharper under this moon?" She shook her head, but even as she did, she thought of the way the forest's scents had seemed to sharpen tonight, the way her heartbeat had felt too loud in her own ears. Kaelin stepped forward, his shadow falling over the prisoner. "Enough games. Who sent you?" The man's gaze slid past him, locking onto Lyria again. "Do you want to know who you are, or will you let him keep you in the dark until it's too late?" Her stomach twisted. "Tell me." Kaelin's hand closed over hers, not gently, but firmly, grounding her. "He's lying. That's what they do." The prisoner chuckled, the sound low and sharp. "I'll tell you. But only her, alone." The silence that followed was heavy. Kaelin's grip tightened, and Lyria could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. "That's not happening," Kaelin said finally, his voice a growl. "Then she'll never know why the blood moon calls to her," the man said simply, leaning back against the wall as though the conversation bored him now. Lyria's breath came fast. "Kaelin, no." His tone brooked no argument. He turned to the guards. "Double the wards. He doesn't speak again until I say so." They left the cell, but Lyria could feel the weight of the prisoner's gaze on her, until the heavy iron door slammed shut behind them. Back in the corridor, Kaelin stopped abruptly and turned to face her. "You're not going near him again." She crossed her arms. "You can't keep me in the dark forever." "Watch me," he said flatly. Their eyes locked, the air between them charged with more than just anger. Something deeper, sharper, dangerously close to something else. But before either could speak again, a horn blast split the air above, deep and urgent. Kaelin's head snapped up, every muscle in him going tense. "That's the inner gate," he said. "Something's here." Something in his tone told her it wasn't a what, it was a who. Chapter 11. The alarm horn's deep note still reverberated through the stones as Kaelin's stride lengthened, his boots pounding against the flagstones in sharp, deliberate rhythm. Lyria had to practically jog to keep up, her skirts whispering around her legs, heart hammering from more than just the pace. The air above the fortress walls felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The moon, swollen and red-tinged, hung over the courtyard, bathing everything in an eerie blood-hued glow. As they reached the base of the inner gate tower, a Shadowfang sentinel bowed low. "Alpha," the visitor demanded entry by name. "Yours." "And?" The guard hesitated, clearly unsettled. "She claims to be kin." Kaelin froze mid-step, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before it hardened again. "That's impossible," he said sharply. "I have no kin outside this fortress." The sentinel shifted uneasily. "She bears your crest, my lord, and she knew about the blood oath." Lyria's head whipped toward him. "Blood oath?" she repeated, but Kaelin didn't answer. He was already moving again, faster now, up the stairs toward the parapet. From above, the visitor was a slim silhouette draped in midnight blue riding leathers, her hood pushed back to reveal hair the color of frost under moonlight. Even from a distance, there was a fierce elegance to her posture, as if she knew exactly how dangerous she appeared. When the heavy gates creaked open just enough to admit her, she stepped through without hesitation, her boots striking the cobblestones with crisp precision. She stopped at the base of the steps, looking up, and her gaze locked instantly on Lyria, not Kaelin. Lyria. The hairs at the back of Lyria's neck prickled. The woman's voice carried easily through the night air. So, the rumors were true. The Alpha Lord keeps her close. Kalen descended the steps, his expression cut from stone. You shouldn't be here, Serena. Her mouth curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And yet, here I am. She flicked her gaze to Lyria again, studying her as one might appraise a weapon. She's even more untouched than I imagined. Lyria's breath caught. I don't know you. No, Serena agreed, but I know you, little moon. She stepped closer, her eyes glinting with something dangerous. And I know what's waking in your blood. Kalen's voice was low, warning. Serena. But she ignored him, circling Lyria slowly, as though drawn by an invisible tether. The pull has started, hasn't it? Colors too bright, scents too sharp, the sound of your own heartbeat too loud in your ears? Lyria stiffened. How do you... Serena smiled faintly. Because I felt it too, once. Before I was bound. Before he claimed me. Kalen's hand closed around Serena's arm, pulling her back with more force than was strictly necessary. You're not here to tell stories. No, she said softly, eyes still locked on Lyria. I'm here to warn her. Before the moon binds her to you forever. The words hit Lyria like a blow. Bind me? She demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. What is she talking about? Kalen's jaw worked, but before he could answer, the sound of bootsteps approached from behind. It was one of the warriors who had captured the silver-shackled prisoner earlier, his face pale, eyes wide. Alpha, the warrior said, voice shaking. The prisoner. He's gone. Gone. The word hung in the air, cold and heavy. Kalen's grip on Serena tightened. What did you do? Her brows lifted, feigning innocence. Me? I've been here the entire time. But Lyria's gut told her that wasn't the whole truth, and when Serena turned that unreadable, glacial gaze on her once more, Lyria felt it again. That same unsettling certainty she'd felt in the dungeon. They were both connected to her. And neither of them was telling her the full story. Kalen barked orders, warriors scattering to lock down the fortress, but his attention kept flicking between Serena and Lyria, as though one wrong move from either could unravel everything. Finally, he caught Lyria's wrist, not gently but not harshly either, and steered her away from the courtyard. We're going inside. She yanked her arm back. Not until you tell me what the hell is going on. What's the blood oath? Why did she say you'll bind me? For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not command, but something dangerously close to fear. It's not time for you to know, he said, voice low. Not yet. She took a step back. Then I'll find out myself. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of the frost-haired stranger still lingering in the courtyard. Lyria didn't know if Serena was an enemy, an ally, or something in between. But she knew this. The Alpha Lord was keeping secrets, and those secrets had everything to do with her. Chapter 12. Lyria could not sleep. It wasn't only the words Serena had spoken, it was the way she had looked at her. Like someone peering straight past skin, past thought, down into the deepest marrow where secrets lived. The Alpha Lord's chambers were quiet now, the last embers in the hearth dimming to a soft glow. Kalen had left hours ago to handle the lockdown, but had posted 2 sentries at her door, which only made her feel more like a prisoner than a guest. She lay on her bed, staring at the slanted shadows on the ceiling, listening to the faint rumble of distant voices beyond the stone walls. Her senses felt heightened. Too heightened. The brush of the linen sheets against her skin seemed sharper. The scent of the extinguished candles sweeter, more complex. Serena's words whispered in her memory. Colors too bright, scents too sharp, the sound of your own heartbeat too loud in your ears. And damn her, Serena was right. The decision to slip out wasn't made in a single moment. It was made in a dozen small rebellions. Swinging her legs over the bed, padding silently to the armoire, pulling on her cloak without fastening the clasp, testing the door latch. The guards were a problem. But Lyria had been raised around warriors. She knew how to listen for gaps in attention. A shuffle of boots on the left, the scrape of a spear haft against stone, a low murmur between them. She waited until their voices dipped, then opened the side window and eased herself onto the narrow ledge that led to the outer gallery. The cold night air bit at her cheeks as she crouched low, edging along the wall until she reached the shadow of a corner turret. From there she dropped down into the lower courtyard, landing with a muted thump in the frost-tipped grass. The fortress felt different at night, less like a stronghold, more like a sleeping beast, full of shifting shadows and watchful silences. The red-tinged moon hung high, its light silvering the wet cobblestones. She headed for the gate where Serena had entered, hoping to find her in the outer ward. The path took her past the abandoned stables, their empty stalls creaking faintly in the wind. Halfway there she heard it, not the orderly tread of a patrol but something slower, more deliberate. Footsteps. She froze, pressing herself against the stable wall. The sound grew nearer, accompanied by the faint clink of metal, and then she saw him, the escaped prisoner. The silver shackles that had once bound his wrists now hung loose, broken at the links. His dark hair was tangled, his clothes torn, but his eyes... Those eyes were luminous in the moonlight. A feral, gold-shot amber, locking onto hers with a predator's precision. "I was wondering when I'd find you," he said, voice low and hoarse as if unused for years. Lyria's heart slammed against her ribs. You were in the dungeon." He tilted his head, studying her. "And you were above it. I could smell you." His nostrils flared slightly, as if confirming something. "It's true, you're awakening. Awakening." Another word she didn't understand. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Someone who's been waiting for you," he said simply. "Too long." Her mind screamed to run, but her feet didn't move. Something about his presence was... wrong, yes, but not entirely terrifying. It was magnetic, in the way a cliff edge draws you closer despite knowing the danger. He took one step forward, and the scent of pine and storm air rolled off him, tinged with a metallic edge. "Kalen hasn't told you, has he? About what you are, about what's coming." Her breath hitched. "You know Kalen?" A shadow of a smile crossed his mouth. "We've crossed paths." He glanced toward the tower, then back at her. "But I'm not here to talk about him. I'm here to talk about you, before it's too late." The air between them felt charged, like lightning was about to strike. A voice cut through the night, sharp and commanding. "Step away from her, Kalen." He strode from the shadows, flanked by 2 armed warriors. His eyes were locked on the prisoner, but his voice was for Lyria. "Come to me. Now." For a heartbeat she hesitated, and in that pause she saw it. The way the prisoner's jaw tightened, the way Kalen's hand curled into a fist, the invisible current between them, pulsing with something old and dangerous. 2 predators, and she was standing between them. Chapter 13. The air turned heavy, the kind of pressure before a storm where even breathing feels like an intrusion. Lyria's pulse pounded in her ears, and her instincts screamed 2 things at once. Move toward Kalen, and don't turn your back on the stranger. The escaped prisoner didn't flinch at the Alpha Lord's voice. If anything, his expression shifted into something sharper, more mocking. "Well, well," the man said, his words rolling out with a dangerous sort of leisure, the Alpha Lord himself. "And here I thought you'd forgotten how to greet an old friend." Kalen's jaw was set like carved obsidian. "You are no friend of mine." The man's amber eyes gleamed. "Ah, but once I was more than that. Weren't we brothers in arms, Kalen? Before you decided certain truths were... inconvenient?" The words seemed to slice into Kalen, though his face barely betrayed it. The only giveaway was the faint twitch in his jaw, and the way his voice deepened when he spoke. "You've broken out of my dungeons. You've trespassed on my grounds. And you've spoken to what is mine." "Mine." The word snagged Lyria's breath. She turned sharply toward Kalen. "I am not..." "Not now, Lyria," he said, his tone low but pulsing with authority, like a leash snapping taut. His gaze didn't leave the prisoner. "You have 3 seconds to step back before my men cut you down." The prisoner smiled faintly, not the easy warmth of someone amused, but the sharp edge of a man who knows the game and enjoys defying the rules. "You still think you can order me," he said softly. "But you've forgotten something, Kalen. The moon remembers everything, and it remembers her." The prisoner's eyes flicked back to Lyria. It wasn't a casual glance. It was like he was taking in every inch of her, the way her cloak hung open, the unfastened clasp, the strand of hair that had slipped loose in the night wind. "Your scent is shifting," he said, almost reverently. "You've felt it, haven't you? The tingling in your skin. The way colors are brighter, sounds louder. That's not an accident." Lyria took a step back, her throat tightening. "I don't know what you're talking about." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. Of course you don't. He wouldn't tell you, because if you knew, you might not choose him. Kaelin moved then. Fast, predatory. One moment he was 3 strides away, the next he was between her and the prisoner, his presence a wall of heat and steel. The moonlight caught the hard planes of his face, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his eyes burned with a protective rage that felt dangerously close to something else. Touch her, Kaelin said, his voice a low growl, and you will not live to see another moonrise. The prisoner chuckled, low and knowing. There it is, the claim in your voice. You can dress it in titles and law all you want, Alpha, but I hear the truth in it. You're already bound to her. You just haven't admitted it yet. His gaze swept between them, the smirk curling further. But the bond isn't sealed, and until it is, she's still free to choose. One of Kaelin's warriors stepped forward, but Kaelin lifted a hand, not to stop the man, but to signal he wanted this moment for himself. You've trespassed for the last time, Kaelin said. His voice carried the authority of a ruler, but underneath it was something raw, an old, half-healed wound that the prisoner seemed to be enjoying pressing. Tell yourself that if it makes you sleep better, the man replied, stepping backward into the deeper shadow near the stables. But the truth, Kaelin, is that you've hidden her from the one person who can tell her who she really is. He turned his eyes back to Lyria, and they seemed to catch the moonlight in a way that made them almost glow. Find me before the next blood moon, little one, if you want the truth. And then, in a movement too fluid to be human, he vaulted the stable wall and vanished into the darkness beyond. Kaelin stood perfectly still for several seconds after he was gone, every line of his body tense, his hands curled into fists. Lyria broke the silence first, her voice trembling. Who was that? And what did he mean by, enough? Kaelin cut in, turning to face her. His eyes locked on hers, and for a second she thought she saw something flicker there, not anger but fear. You will not leave the keep without my permission again, he said, the command in his voice brooking no argument. Do you understand? Her chest tightened. I understand that you're hiding something from me. The muscle in his jaw flexed again. It's not the time. But Lyria didn't miss the way his gaze lingered on her, not just on her face but on the hollow of her throat, as though he could feel the pulse beneath her skin. It was the same look the prisoner had given her, and for the first time she began to wonder if mine didn't just mean possession. It meant claim. It meant bond. It meant she was standing in the middle of a dangerous, ancient fight between 2 powerful men who both believed her fate belonged to them, and neither seemed willing to let go. Chapter 14. The corridor back to the keep was silent, except for the echo of their boots against the flagstones. Kaelin walked ahead, his long strides purposeful, shoulders tense, every movement radiating control, but not the calm kind. This was the brittle, dangerous control of a man who knew if he loosened his grip, the whole thing might shatter. Lyria followed several steps behind, her mind replaying the prisoner's words in relentless loops. Your scent is shifting. You felt it. He wouldn't tell you. Her pulse was still unsettled, not just from fear, but from something else. Something she refused to name. That man's gaze had been intrusive, yes, but Kaelin's had been possessive. And the worst part? She hadn't hated it. When they reached the tall, carved doors of the council chamber, Kaelin didn't lead her inside. Instead, he veered sharply left, down a narrower hallway lit only by occasional sconces. This isn't the way to my chambers, Lyria said, her voice sharper than she intended. His reply was clipped. I'm aware. They came to a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. Kaelin unlocked it with a key that hung from a chain around his neck. The door swung open to reveal a smaller room. No throne, no banners, no ceremonial trappings. Just a wide table, stacks of maps, and shelves laden with thick, leather-bound volumes. This, he said, stepping inside, is where we talk. Lyria hesitated on the threshold. Talk. That's a first. He turned, and the look he gave her made her stop in her tracks. Do not mistake my silence for indifference, Lyria. If I keep things from you, it's because the truth isn't a harmless thing I can hand over without consequence. Then explain tonight, she shot back. Who was he? What did he mean about me? Kaelin closed the door behind her, the latch clicking in a way that made the room suddenly feel much smaller. He crossed to the table, bracing his hands on the edge, head bowed for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. but there was no mistaking the weight in it. His name is Rygar. Once he was my second, my most trusted warrior, and for a time, my friend. The confession hung in the air. What happened? Lyria asked quietly. Kaylin's eyes lifted to hers, and she saw for the first time not just the hardened Alpha Lord, but the man who had bled and lost and carried wounds that time had failed to close. He wanted power, Kaylin said, more than he was entitled to, more than the moon would grant him. He began experimenting. Experimenting with what? His gaze sharpened. Blood. Bonding rituals. Things no wolf with honor would touch. Lyria's breath caught. Bonding rituals? You mean, yes, Kaylin said, cutting her off. The sacred rites between mates. He was twisting them, trying to forge bonds where there was no true connection, using blood to force obedience. Her skin prickled, and you stopped him. I thought I had. His voice darkened. Until tonight? Lyria moved closer without quite meaning to, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. And what about what he said? About me? Kaylin's eyes tracked her movement, lingering briefly on her hands before returning to her face. That's the part I had hoped to keep from you until I knew more. But Rygar always did know where to sink the blade. He pushed away from the table and closed the distance between them, stopping so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. You've felt it, haven't you? He said softly. She swallowed. Felt what? The way your senses have sharpened. The pull when I'm near you. The way the world feels different under the moonlight. Her heartbeat spiked. I thought I was imagining it. You're not, he said. His voice had gone low, not the commanding growl of an alpha, but something more intimate. It means the shift is starting. Her lips parted. Shift? He hesitated. She could see the battle in his eyes, the instinct to protect her from the truth clashing with something deeper, something older. You're not fully human, Lyria, he said finally. You never were. The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, but Kaylin's hand shot out, closing gently around her wrist. Breathe, he murmured. I told you, the truth is not harmless. She stared at him, her mind scrambling to piece together every strange moment she'd ever experienced. The way she'd always been faster, stronger than other girls her age, the dreams that felt too vivid to be dreams, the inexplicable pull she'd felt toward the forest at night. What am I? She whispered. His thumb brushed against her pulse, not absently, but as though he were grounding her, measuring each frantic beat. That, he said, is a question I can only answer in part. You are rare, and because of that, you are valuable. To me, to Rygar, to anyone who understands what you are. And what am I? His gaze held hers, the silver in his eyes seeming to glow faintly in the candlelight. A latent moonborn, half human, half wolf, and more than either. Lyria's breath came fast, her mind a storm. And the bond he mentioned? Kaylin's jaw tightened. He wants to claim you. Force the bond before your shift is complete. That's why he escaped. That's why he risked coming here tonight. Her stomach turned cold. And you? What do you want? For a moment, the alpha mask slipped. His eyes softened, just enough for her to see the hunger, the protectiveness, the conflict. I want you safe, he said. Then, after a pause, his voice dropped even lower. And if I'm honest, Lyria, I want you to choose me. The words lodged in her chest, warm and dangerous. She didn't trust herself to answer. But as they stood there, the distance between them charged and trembling, Lyria understood something with startling clarity. The real danger wasn't just Rygar. It was the fact that part of her already wanted to choose Kaylin. And that part was growing stronger by the day. Chapter 15. The rest of the night should have been silent, but it wasn't. Even after Kaylin dismissed her to rest, Lyria found herself pacing the length of her chamber, unable to still her mind. Half human, half wolf, more than either. The words echoed like a drumbeat under her skin. And worse than the truth was the way Kaylin had looked at her when he said it. Like she was not just important, but his. A soft knock startled her. The door opened without waiting for permission, and Kaylin stepped in. His presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with his size, and everything to do with the quiet, controlled force that clung to him. Get dressed, he said. We're going somewhere. Her brows rose. It's the middle of the night. That's when it's safest. She wanted to ask safe from what? but there was something in his tone that told her she'd get no answer until he chose to give it. Minutes later, they moved through the keep's shadowed corridors, their footsteps soft against the rugs that muffled sound. The air grew cooler as they descended, the scent of stone and old parchment seeping in. They reached another guarded door, this one flanked by 2 wolves in full armor, each bowing deeply to Kaylin before stepping aside. The Alpha produced the same iron key she'd seen earlier, but this time, the lock it fit into was twice as intricate, the tumblers clicking with a musical precision. The door opened to reveal a spiral stairwell plunging deep beneath the keep. Lyria followed him down, her hand trailing along the cold wall for balance. "You keep your records underground?" she murmured. "Where they're safest," Kaylin said. "Some of what you're about to see has been here for over 1,000 years. Even fire would have a hard time reaching it." The stairwell ended at a massive vault door of blackened steel. Runes glowed faintly across its surface, not carved but embedded, as though the metal itself had been forged with them inside. Lyria felt a strange pull toward those markings. Her fingertips itched to trace them. Kaylin noticed. "Don't touch," he said quietly. "They're protective wards, strong enough to drop even an alpha if triggered." When the vault opened, a breath of cool, dry air washed over her, carrying the scent of dust, leather, and something older. The room beyond was vast, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow. Shelves stretched farther than her eyes could follow, each stacked with scrolls, bound tomes, and jars filled with preserved herbs and ink pigments. At the center stood a wide stone table, its surface etched with more runes. Candles burned along its edges, their flames steady despite the faint drafts. Kaylin led her to the table and drew out a single leather volume from a locked cabinet at the far side. The book's cover was darkened with age, the binding reinforced with silver clasps. "This," he said, laying it gently on the table, "is the moonborn registry. Every known half-blood recorded in the last 8 centuries is named here." Lyria's breath caught. "Half-bloods like me." He met her gaze. "Yes, and you'll see why you're not just unusual. You're unprecedented." As he turned the pages, Lyria caught glimpses of sketches, handwritten records, family lines mapped out in delicate ink. But when Kaylin stopped, her attention fixed on a single name inked in crimson at the top of the page. Her mother's. She reached out as if to touch the page but hesitated. "My mother was moonborn?" "Your mother was more than moonborn," Kaylin said. She carried a dormant strain, one that until now had never fully awakened in her bloodline. It skipped her and went straight to you. Lyria's pulse pounded. "And what does that mean?" "That you're not just half-wolf," he said softly. "You're potentially the only living moonborn alpha female." The words hit her harder than she expected. "Alpha. Female?" "Yes," Kaylin said. "A rarity so extreme that most think it's myth. A wolf with your lineage could bond with an alpha male, and instead of submitting could stand equal." Her breath came unsteadily. "Is that why Rygar wants me?" "It's why everyone will want you if word gets out," Kaylin said. "You're not just a prize. You're a threat to every pack that fears balance." The way he said prize made her shiver. She didn't think he'd meant to, but there was a possessive edge there that curled around her like a chain and a promise at once. When she looked at him, his gaze was already locked on hers. Intense, unwavering, and far too close. "You said you wanted me to choose you," she said, before she could stop herself why for a long moment he didn't answer. Then, with deliberate slowness, he stepped closer, bracing his hands on the table's edge so she was caught between his arms. "Because, Lyria." His voice was low, dangerous in its honesty. "When I first caught your scent, I knew I would kill anyone else who tried to claim you, and I don't apologize for that." Her heartbeat roared in her ears. The air between them seemed to thin, charged with something that made her chest tight. But before she could respond, the door to the vault slammed open above them. Shouts rang out, the clash of steel, the snarl of wolves. Kaylin's head whipped toward the sound, his body instantly shifting from man to predator, his silver eyes blazing. "Stay behind me," he ordered, voice sharp as a blade. "And no matter what happens, you do not leave this room." Then he was moving, a blur of controlled violence as he bounded toward the stairs, his wolf already threatening to break free. Chapter 16. The heavy door above thundered shut again, sealing Kaylin away from her with the chaos. The air in the Moonborn archives shifted, colder, sharper, as though the stone itself sensed danger, Lyria's pulse drummed in her ears. The candles cast long shadows across the shelves, every flicker making the runes carved into the table seem to twist and move. "Stay here." His command still rang in her mind, but the part of her that had survived betrayal, exile, and near death didn't like feeling cornered, not even by walls of ancient stone. A sound broke through the stillness. Soft, calculated. Not the heavy tread of Kaelin's boots, not the guttural snarls of a full-shifted wolf. This was lighter, almost feline in stealth. Her gaze darted toward the far aisle between shelves, where something shifted in the dimness. A man stepped into view. No, not a man. At least not fully. His eyes glinted like burnished gold in the candlelight, his skin marked with faint, silvery scars that pulsed faintly as if lit from beneath. The way he moved was wrong. Smooth, fluid, like water flowing around obstacles. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "So," he drawled, his voice carrying an unnatural resonance. "The Alpha Lord's precious secret." Lyria's spine stiffened. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what you're worth. And unlike Kaelin, I won't waste time with oaths and promises." Her mind raced. His scent hit her then. Wrong, a tangled mix of wolf and something sharper, metallic. She'd never smelled it before, but instinct screamed, not safe. He advanced, hands loose at his sides, but there was nothing relaxed about him. "You have two choices, girl. You come with me willingly, and I'll make sure you live long enough to be useful. Or you try to take me," Lyria said, forcing steel into her voice, "and see how that goes for you." His grin widened, revealing teeth just a little too sharp. "Oh, I hope you make me work for it." He lunged. Lyria's body moved before she had time to think. A sidestep, quick and instinctive, the kind of motion that belonged to someone who knew how to avoid a predator's strike. But she had never trained for this. Her shoulder slammed into the edge of the rune-carved table, sending a jolt of pain through her arm, but she stayed on her feet. He came again, faster this time, his hand shooting out, claws extending mid-strike. Lyria ducked under his arm, and for a breath, her vision flickered. The world sharpened. She could hear his breathing as if it were right in her ear. Smell the spike of his adrenaline, the tang of sweat and iron. Her heart rate slowed, not in fear, but in focus. When he struck the third time, she didn't dodge. She caught his wrist. The moment her skin touched his, something in her blood roared awake. Power surged through her, raw and wild, and her grip tightened with a strength that should have been impossible for her size. His eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, before she twisted his arm hard enough to make bone grind against bone. He snarled, his other hand swinging toward her head. She let go, stepped back, and this time her lips pulled back in a snarl of her own, sharp, feral, and utterly unfamiliar. Her fingernails had lengthened, curving into claws. The intruder blinked, and in that blink she pounced, not thinking, just moving. Her shoulder hit his chest, driving him back into a shelf hard enough to send scrolls raining down around them. The smell of his blood hit the air, sharp and hot. "You're not supposed to be awakened yet," he rasped, his smirk faltering for the first time. Lyria didn't answer. She didn't want to speak. Every instinct told her to finish it, to tear his throat out before he could recover. Her muscles coiled, ready to strike. But before she could move, a roar tore through the vault. Kaelin's voice, but deeper, more wolf than man. The intruder's eyes flicked toward the stairs. He shoved Lyria back with more force than she expected, sending her sliding across the table's surface, and then he was gone, vanishing between the shelves with inhuman speed. Kaelin appeared a heartbeat later in full shift, his wolf massive, fur silver bright in the dim light, eyes blazing with murderous intent. He padded toward her, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of blood, both hers and the intruder's. His wolf form lowered his head, pressing his muzzle against her shoulder in a swift, rough check for injuries. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her chest still heaved with the aftermath of what had just happened. He shifted back mid-step, the change rolling through him in a smooth ripple of muscle and bone. When he spoke, his voice was still edged with that wolf growl. "Tell me. Exactly. What happened?" Lyria swallowed, her claws slowly receding as she forced herself to breathe. And then, for the first time, she realized Kaelin was staring not at her face but at her hands. "You shifted," he said softly, "not fully but enough." There was no accusation in his tone, only something she couldn't quite place. Wonder, fear, and something darker, almost possessive. Chapter 17. The archives were quiet again, save for the faint hiss of candle flames and the muted thump of her heartbeat. Kalen didn't move for a long moment, his silver eyes locked on hers, and there was something in that gaze that made her skin prickle, not fear but heat, as though the room had closed in around them. He stepped closer, closing the space until she could feel the whisper of his breath against her cheek. "You touched him," Kalen said low, almost like it was an accusation, "and that's when it happened." Lyria swallowed. "I didn't think, I just reacted." His jaw clenched, his hand lifting, not to grab but to hover near her face, fingers just brushing the line of her jaw. "You felt it, didn't you?" She didn't answer right away. The truth was, she'd felt everything. The rush of instinct, the wild clarity, the raw molten strength humming through her blood, and underneath it, tangled with the adrenaline, there had been him. Even when Kalen wasn't in the room, some part of her seemed to tune itself to him, the way her pulse matched his, the way his presence filled the air like an unshakable scent. "I felt different," she admitted softly. Kalen's fingers curled lightly under her chin, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. His touch wasn't rough, but it wasn't hesitant either. It was the touch of a man used to being obeyed, yet careful with her. "That wasn't an accident," he murmured. "It means you're waking up, the blood in you, the bond, it's starting to burn through whatever's been keeping it quiet." Her lips parted to ask what bond. But the way he was looking at her stole the words before they could form. It was more than just desire in his gaze. There was protectiveness, yes, but also possession, as though the mere thought of someone else touching her was a challenge he would kill over. "You scared me?" he said suddenly, the growl low in his throat. "For a moment I thought I'd come back to find you gone. Or worse." She tried to smile, though her heart was still beating too fast. "You think I'm that easy to take?" He didn't smile back. "No," he said. "I think you're mine, and that makes you a target." He stepped closer until their bodies were almost touching. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating, that strange scent of wolf and storm wrapping around her. Her hands had been clenched at her sides without her realizing it. Now, they rose of their own accord, resting against the hard plane of his chest. The steady, heavy thud of his heart pulsed against her palms. The moment her fingers curled into his shirt, Kalen's control seemed to fray. His other hand came up, cupping the side of her neck, thumb brushing the racing pulse at her throat. "You shouldn't look at me like that," he said, voice rougher now. "And how am I looking at you? Like, you don't know what I'll do if you keep it up." The air between them throbbed with tension. Somewhere far above, the faint sounds of the keep carried through the stone, muffled shouts, the echo of boots. But here, in this carved-out pocket of heat and shadow, there was only them. Her voice came out quieter than she meant. "Maybe I do know." That was all it took. His mouth claimed hers in a kiss that was nothing like the tentative brushes they'd shared before. This was deep, consuming, acclaiming in every sense. The taste of him was dark and heady, a mix of warmth and something wild, untamed. Lyria gasped against him, and his arm wrapped around her waist, hauling her flush against his body. She could feel every inch of his strength, the coiled heat under his skin, the way his wolf seemed to press forward into the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "I need to find him," Kalen said, though his voice was reluctant. "But I don't want to leave you again." Her hands were still on his chest. She could feel the pull between them, like a cord tightening, drawing them closer no matter how much logic said they should step apart. "Then don't," she whispered. He exhaled sharply, the sound almost like a growl, and for a heartbeat she thought he might give in, might lift her onto the table and let the hunt wait. But his jaw hardened. "If I don't hunt him now, he'll return. And next time, he'll bring help." He stepped back just enough to reach for the weapons rack along the wall, taking a silver-edged dagger and sliding it across the table toward her. "Then take this," he said, "and if anyone but me walks through that door, you don't hesitate." She nodded, fingers closing around the hilt. Kalen lingered at the doorway, his eyes raking over her one last time. The look was heated, yes, but also deeply, achingly protective, like he was memorizing her in case the next hour didn't go his way. and then he was gone, his footsteps fading into the dark beyond the stairs. Chapter 18. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, and Lyria was left in a hush that suddenly felt far too wide. The dagger Kaelin had given her lay across her lap, its silver edge catching the candlelight with a cold gleam. She kept her fingers wrapped around the hilt. Not because she was afraid, she told herself, but because letting go would feel like loosening her hold on him. Above, the keep's heart still beat in muffled sounds. The shouts of guards in distant corridors, the thud of hurried boots against flagstone. But the archives were buried deep, the air still and cool. It was the kind of quiet that let you hear your own thoughts. Or worse, the thoughts you were trying to avoid. Her mind kept circling back to that kiss, not just the heat of it, or the way his hand had fit so perfectly against the curve of her neck, but the weight. Kaelin had kissed her like a vow, like a promise no force in this world or the next would be able to break. She could still taste him. And her body remembered in exquisite, dangerous detail the way he had pulled her closer. The solid heat of him, the unshakable strength coiled in every line of muscle. She shook herself, forcing her attention toward the door. He'd told her not to hesitate. But what if it wasn't hesitation that was the problem? What if she couldn't bring herself to strike, because some part of her was too busy scanning for his return instead? Meanwhile, Kaelin was a shadow in the tunnels. He moved without sound, his wolf sharpened to a razor edge. Every breath carried scent, the faint metallic tang of silver, the acrid musk of the intruder, and woven underneath it, something that twisted his gut in fury. The smell of Lyria on another male. The memory of her eyes just before he left, that unguarded, vulnerable softness, was a thread pulling at him, urging him to turn back. But instinct kept him forward, following the trail with predatory focus. The corridor narrowed, lit only by the faint glow of moonlight spilling from a fissure in the stone. Kaelin's boots made no sound, and his hand stayed close to the hilt of his blade. Back in the archives, Lyria caught the faintest sound, so faint she thought she imagined it. Not Kaelin's footstep, his tread was heavy, deliberate. This was softer, irregular. A scrape, then a pause, a slow, almost cautious advance. Her grip on the dagger tightened, the candlelight wavered as if stirred by a draft, and the hair at the back of her neck lifted. "Kaelin!" she called softly. No answer. The next moment, a shadow detached itself from the doorway. It wasn't Kaelin. The figure was taller, leaner, and he moved with a slinking kind of grace. The grace of someone who didn't need to make noise to be dangerous. His eyes glinted amber in the dim light, and the smirk on his face carried a familiarity she couldn't place. "Well, well," the stranger murmured, voice smooth as oiled leather. The Alpha's little secret? Her heart thudded. "I'd take a step back if I were you," she warned, raising the dagger. He chuckled. "Not unkindly, but not kindly either. You're quicker than they said. Pretty, too. I can see why he's so territorial." Somewhere in the stone above, a faint tremor of movement, the telltale vibration of a second set of boots. Kaelin was close. She could feel it in the same way she felt her own pulse. The stranger took a step closer anyway. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "At least, not in the way you're thinking. But you deserve to know why your Alpha is so interested in you. You're not just a guest here, little wolf. You're leverage." Her stomach twisted. Leverage for what? He smiled in a way that promised he'd enjoy telling her, but then froze. His nostrils flared, and in that instant, Kaelin appeared behind him, silent as a phantom. What happened next was fast, brutal, and wordless. Kaelin's arm locked around the intruder's throat, the silver blade pressing just enough to draw a bead of blood. His voice was low, dangerous. "Step into my territory again, and I'll gut you where you stand." The intruder only smirked even as Kaelin shoved him toward the door. "Careful, Alpha. The more you guard her, the more the others will want her, and sooner or later, you can't be everywhere at once." He slipped away into the shadows like smoke, leaving Kaelin's fury burning in the space he'd occupied. Kaelin turned instantly to Lyria, crossing the room in 3 strides. His hands were on her face before she could speak, scanning her as though he expected to find blood. "Did he touch you?" His voice was raw, almost hoarse. "No." His breath came hard, his forehead dropping briefly to hers. "I shouldn't have left you." "You went to protect me," she said softly. His thumb brushed her cheek, and his other hand slid to her waist, pulling her in. This close, she could feel the restrained tremor in his muscles. Not fear, but the aftershock of barely contained violence. "You're mine," he said, the words as much a vow as the kiss he gave her next. Slow, deliberate, and threaded with something deeper than possession, need. Chapter 19. Kaelin didn't leave her side. The moment the intruder's shadow had disappeared into the night, he locked the archive's door from the inside, his gaze never straying from her face as though even a blink might risk her vanishing. The dagger was still in her hand. She hadn't even realized she'd kept her grip on it until he reached for her fingers, prying them gently open and setting the weapon aside. "You don't need this while I'm here," he murmured, voice low and steady, though his eyes still burned with the heat of a wolf fresh from the hunt. The candlelight threw gold across his hair, highlighting the sharp planes of his jaw, the small scar at the corner of his mouth. He cupped her cheek again, his touch warm and grounding, as if reassuring himself she was flesh and blood, not a phantom. Her breath caught. The earlier adrenaline was giving way to a different kind of awareness, the kind that made her heart skip in strange, dangerous rhythms. "You scared me," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Not because you weren't here, but because I wasn't sure if you'd come back the same." His brow furrowed. "The same?" "Still. Mine." Something shifted in his expression. The hard alpha steel softened. Not much, but enough to bear a glimpse of the man underneath. He stepped closer, until the heat of his body soaked into her skin, until her back pressed to the edge of the wooden table and she had nowhere left to retreat. "You think I could come back anything but yours?" His voice was velvet over steel. "Lyria, if you only knew how deep I'm in." He stopped himself, jaw tightening. She could sense the weight of unspoken things, truths he was holding back because once said, there would be no undoing them. She reached up, her fingers curling into the front of his shirt. "Then tell me." His gaze locked on hers for a long moment before he leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "You were never meant to be here. The first night I saw you, I told myself I'd keep my distance. But every time you looked at me, every time you smiled, I started thinking about what it would mean to keep you, to claim you, not as a shield, not as a political pawn, but as my mate." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Her pulse thudded in her ears. "Mate?" Kaelin's hand slid from her cheek to the nape of her neck, his thumb stroking slowly, possessively, not just in the way the pack uses the word, in the way my wolf uses it. "You are the only one my instincts recognize as ours." Heat pooled low in her belly, a pull as primal as it was tender. She had felt this bond too, even if she'd been too cautious to name it. Before she could answer, his lips were on hers. Not with the slow deliberation of before, but with an urgency that spoke of everything he'd nearly lost tonight. Her hands clutched at his shoulders, her body melting into his as his arm wrapped fully around her waist, lifting her slightly onto the table. The kiss deepened, his mouth demanding yet reverent, until she was dizzy from the lack of air and the rush of heat curling through her. She felt the rumble in his chest, low and feral, as his hands slid along her spine, pressing her closer until there was no space left between them. When they finally broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing hard. "I will end this war," he said, voice rough. "I will end every threat to you. But when it's over, Lyria, I will not ask. I will take what's already mine." Her heart fluttered, torn between fear and anticipation. "And if I say yes now?" The corner of his mouth lifted in something halfway between a smirk and a vow. "Then I start tonight." The night stretched on in the archives, the danger outside momentarily held at bay by the fortress walls, and by Kaelin's unyielding presence. Yet Lyria knew, deep down, that what awaited them in the coming days would decide not only the fate of the pack, but the shape of their bond, and she wasn't entirely sure which battle would be harder to win. Chapter 20. The wind howled outside the fortress walls, rattling the iron-banded shutters of the old library. Somewhere beyond the storm, the pack was restless. Lyria could sense it in the air, the faint hum of tension that every wolf carried when trouble was near. Kaelin was still standing close, so close that she could feel the brush of his breath against her temple. He hadn't let go of her since he'd spoken the word mate, as though afraid she might try to walk away, and he wouldn't be able to stop her. The word had sunk deep into her bones, warming her from the inside even while the reality of it set her pulse racing. She'd known him as the Alpha Lord, dangerous, unyielding, a ruler whose voice could command armies, but hearing that word on his lips, it had stripped away the distance, leaving only the raw truth of what he was to her, and what she might be to him. "You're quiet," Kalen murmured, tilting his head slightly to search her face. "I'm thinking." His mouth curved faintly, though his eyes stayed sharp. "About running?" She gave a small, breathless laugh. "Not exactly." "Good," he said simply. The kind of good that sounded more like a verdict than a compliment. "Because we don't have time for that. The traitor will move faster now that he knows I've closed ranks around you. The traitor..." Her stomach tightened. Even before Kalen had told her, she'd suspected. The way Darius, the beta she'd once thought was her friend, perhaps something more, had avoided her eyes in the council hall. The subtle shift in the pack's watch patterns, the ease with which her location had been compromised last week. Still, part of her had wanted to believe she was wrong. Kalen's hand tightened slightly at her waist, drawing her attention back to him. "Lyria, I know you once trusted him. I know you may even still be holding on to that trust. But when I bring him to you, you'll see the truth for yourself." Her throat went dry. "You're certain it's him?" His gaze sharpened, a predator's certainty in his eyes. "I don't act on guesses." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. Darius had been the first one to welcome her when she'd been brought into the pack, dazed and uncertain. He'd been her translator for the confusing tangle of pack laws, the one to bring her bread and meat when she'd been too shy to ask for food in the Great Hall. And now, he was the one who had betrayed her. Kalen shifted, his thumb brushing the underside of her jaw. "I will give you something no one ever gave me, Lyria, the truth without lies or half-shadows. But when you see him for what he is, you need to decide. Will you stand beside me, or will you walk away?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "You think I would walk away after everything?" she whispered. His eyes softened in that subtle way that still made her breath hitch. "I think you care about people more than they deserve. And that's why I'm warning you. The choice will hurt, no matter what you decide." Before she could speak, the door to the archives rattled with a sharp knock. Kalen's posture changed instantly, his spine straightening, his shoulders squaring, every trace of warmth replaced by the cold, commanding presence of an alpha in full control. "Enter," he called. The heavy door swung open, revealing Garrick, Kalen's most trusted sentinel. The wolf's eyes flicked briefly to Lyria before settling on Kalen. "We have him," Garrick said simply. "He's in the courtyard." He didn't resist. Kalen's jaw tightened. Of course he didn't. He thinks he can talk his way out. He looked back at Lyria, his hand finding hers. "Come." The courtyard was lit by torches, their flames snapping in the wind. Rain had begun to fall. Light, cold drops that dampened the air and carried the scent of wet stone and earth. Darius was standing in the center of the flagstones, hands bound before him with silver-laced cord. His eyes found Lyria immediately, and for a moment they softened, the way they had so many times before, when he'd teased her about her awkwardness, or when he'd offered her comfort. "Lyria," he said, voice almost gentle. "You don't understand." Kalen stepped forward, his presence cutting across the space like a blade. "No, she's going to understand exactly." The Alpha Lord's voice was low, but it carried, threading into every ear in the courtyard. "You sold her name, her location, and her life to those who would see her dead. You lied to your pack, to your Alpha, to the one you were sworn to protect, and now you will answer for it." Darius's jaw tightened, but his gaze stayed on Lyria. "I did what I had to. You don't know what he is, Lyria, what he's done. You think he's protecting you, but it's only because you're useful to him. You're a piece in his war, and when he wins, he'll cast you aside." She flinched, not because she believed him, but because his words touched the fear she'd carried in secret since the day Kalen had first taken her into his fortress. Kalen didn't so much as glance at her, his eyes locked on the beta. "You're trying to plant doubt, even now. That's how I know you've got nothing left but poison." Lyria stepped forward before she could think better of it. The rain was running down her hair, sliding cool against her cheeks, but her voice came out steady. "I know exactly who he is," she said. "And I know what you are too, Darius. You made me believe you were my friend. You made me trust you. And all the while, you were waiting for the moment I was easiest to hand over." A moment, something flickered in Darius's eyes, guilt, or perhaps regret, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Kaelin's voice broke the silence, final and absolute. "You'll be tried by the laws of the pack at dawn. Until then, you will remain in the holding cells." As Garrick and 2 others led Darius away, Kaelin turned to Lyria. The cold steel of the Alpha melted just enough for her to see the man again. "You spoke for yourself," he said quietly. "That matters." She didn't answer. She just let him take her hand, leading her back through the rain toward the warmth of the fortress. Inside, when the door closed behind them, she finally found her voice. "You were right. It does hurt." Kaelin's thumb brushed the back of her hand. "I told you." And yet, in the flickering light of the fire, the hurt was tempered by something else, the quiet certainty that whatever storms were still coming, she would face them at his side. Chapter 21. The corridors of the fortress were quiet, save for the muted thud of Kaelin's boots against the stone. Lyria's bare feet barely made a sound as she kept pace beside him, her hand still caught in his like he feared she might dissolve into mist if he let go. The torches along the walls burned low, their light softening the edges of his face. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. It whispered against the narrow windows, seeping into the silence between them. Kaelin led her not to the great hall or the council chamber, but to a smaller set of double doors she had never seen him open before. "What is this place?" she asked. "You'll see," he said, voice low, almost unreadable. He pushed the doors open, and the scent of cedar and old parchment washed over her. Inside was a room both grand and intimate, a private library lit by the golden glow of a single hearth. Shelves rose from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound tomes and scrolls. A single table stood near the fire, its surface scattered with maps and an open bottle of deep red wine. Lyria stepped inside cautiously. The room felt personal, as though it was not meant for just anyone to enter. "This is where I come when I can't trust the rest of the world," Kaelin said behind her, shutting the doors. She turned to face him, trying to read the shadow in his voice. "Why bring me here?" "Because tonight," he said, stepping closer, "I can't trust anyone but you." She didn't move as he reached past her to the table, pouring 2 glasses of wine. His hand brushed hers when he handed her one, and she felt the subtle tension in his body. Not just the usual controlled power, but something coiled beneath the surface, something unsettled. "You've been quieter than usual since the courtyard," she said softly. Kaelin took a slow drink before answering. "Because I'm thinking about tomorrow." "The trial?" His eyes locked with hers over the rim of his glass. "The trial will happen, but I'm not certain what will come after." The firelight threw gold into his irises, making them seem almost molten. "Darius isn't the kind of wolf who acts alone, Lyria. If he betrayed us, someone told him to." The thought made her blood run cold. "You think there's someone else in the pack?" "I know there is," Kaelin cut in, his voice low and certain. "And if they realize Darius failed, they may move faster. They may try to finish what he started." She set her glass down, her pulse quickening. "So, tomorrow isn't the end." His mouth curved, not into a smile but into something sharper, more dangerous. "Tomorrow is just the moment they realize they've lost the first move." The fire popped softly, filling the space between their words. Lyria became aware of how close they were, close enough to see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Then what happens tonight?" she asked, her voice quieter than she meant. Kaelin set his own glass aside and stepped fully into her space. "Tonight, I make sure you know exactly where you stand with me, and exactly how far I will go to keep you here." Her breath caught. "Kaelin." He touched her then, a slow, deliberate caress along her cheek, trailing back to cup the side of her neck. The weight of his gaze was almost physical, pulling at her until she felt her knees weaken. "You've been marked in my sight since the moment I found you," he said. "I waited because I thought you needed time, but I won't wait if it means losing you." The room seemed to grow warmer. The shadows deepened around them, as though the fortress itself understood what was happening and had decided to give them privacy. When he kissed her, it wasn't the restrained brush of lips he'd given her once before. It was fierce and claiming, his hand sliding into her hair to anchor her as though he feared she might vanish. She rose into him, her own hands finding the line of his shoulders, the heat of him searing through her fingertips. The wine glass she'd abandoned tipped slightly on the table, the sound barely audible beneath the rush of her heartbeat. Kalen broke the kiss only to rest his forehead against hers. "Say it," he murmured. "Say you're mine." Her answer was barely a whisper. "I'm yours." The hours that followed blurred into a haze of warmth and breathless closeness. Not hurried, not desperate, but deep and unshakable. It felt like an unspoken vow woven into every touch, every wordless glance. By the time she stirred in the pre-dawn dimness, the fire had burned low, and Kalen was sitting in the armchair by the hearth, fully dressed, his eyes shadowed but alert. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. His gaze flicked to her, and there was something in it she couldn't quite name. "Didn't want to." A faint knock sounded at the library door. Garrick's voice came muffled through the wood. "My lord, you need to come. There's been an incident." Kalen's head tilted slightly, his expression hardening in an instant. "What kind of incident?" There was a pause. Then Garrick's voice, low and grim. "The beta is dead." Lyria sat up sharply, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Dead? The trial hadn't even begun. Kalen rose slowly from the chair, his eyes never leaving the door. His voice, when it came, was calm, too calm. "Tell the guards to hold their positions. No one leaves the fortress." "Yes, my lord," Garrick replied. When the footsteps faded, Kalen looked back at Lyria. His expression was unreadable, but in his eyes, she thought she saw a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. Whether it was grief, or something far more dangerous, she didn't know. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Kindly comment below if you loved it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for more amazing content. Drop a comment with your favorite moment, and I'll see you in the next one.